The original brand focus for the hardcore outdoor enthusiasts, it's the thru hikers, the search and rescue folks, the lone wolf in the backcountry type of archetype. I said, if we're going to turn this into something big, if we really want to seize this opportunity, I think we need to do a hard pivot. That was the big inflection point, I think, was like, we're going to make this mainstream. Where AllTrails really shines, where I think it's just best in class, best in the world, is when you layer on the user-generated content, and then you have all of the recent photos and reviews and ratings. It's very powerful when you see that in the wild.
Welcome to Subversive, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories from the best consumer subscription apps in the world. We'll bring you lessons for how to grow your consumer subscription business, including insights and inflection points that led to exponential growth from leaders at category-defining companies and innovative startups. Let's get into the show. My guest today is Ron Schneidermann, the CEO of AllTrails. Since joining the company in 2015 as COO and CMO, Ron has helped AllTrails pivot from an early adopter base of backcountry athletes and search and rescue professionals to a much larger, more mainstream audience of casual hikers. In this episode, we talk about how AllTrails has adapted its core product offering, brand, pricing, and growth strategy in order to unlock this segment of users and ultimately expand internationally. All right. Welcome, Ron Schneidermann, to the Subversive podcast. Ron, we've known each other for several years. I'm a huge AllTrails fan, as you know. Probably started using the app about a decade ago when I was still in the Bay Area and continue to use it almost every week now with my family, with my wife and kids, who all love the outdoors. So before we jump into our discussion today, we'd love to just hear a little bit more about AllTrails from your perspective. What does AllTrails do for those who don't already know, and how has the company evolved since you joined in 2015?
Sure thing. And let me start by saying I am a huge Phil Carter fan. I was really excited when you told me you were starting up a podcast specifically focused on growth. I've learned a ton from you over the years on growth. So yeah, really excited to be here. This is going to be fun. I guess to answer your question, AllTrails is an app and a website that helps people find really great trails for hiking, running, cycling, backpacking, all over the world. So we are the world's largest and most trusted platform for outdoor exploration that's out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the kind words. I didn't expect it, but I appreciate it. So you joined AllTrails in 2015. Can you just briefly talk a little bit about your journey to get to AllTrails? I know you worked for a couple of other interesting companies before AllTrails, including a company you founded yourself that was also in the outdoor space. What led you to AllTrails?
Yeah. So as you kind of noted, I'm not the founder of AllTrails. I took over from the founder in 2015 when it was a 6-person company. So prior to AllTrails, I did have my own startup in the ski space called Liftopia. I was there for 9 years. Outdoor tech is really small. And after Liftopia, I was running growth at Yelp. So like you, my background's in growth, but I was more on the marketing side. I was a CMO at Liftopia, and growth marketing at Yelp was more through the marketing lens and the product lens. While I was at Yelp, I was kind of figuring out my next move. I thought I was actually going to go to the other side of the table, maybe go in-house at a VC, do growth services kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then the founder of AllTrails hit me up, and it was kind of a side project. He and the team were basically splitting time, like 6 months a year working on AllTrails and 6 months a year working on All Snow. And, it was kind of an interesting pitch, but what really got me was we were just sitting down over coffee. He opened up Google Analytics and he just showed me the web traffic. He's like, look at this SEO engine that we've built. And I'd never in my career had that much free traffic just flowing into a platform. And to their credit too, they were really early on the subscription adoption curve. They launched a subscription product in 2014. I had never even really heard of it at that time, if I'm being honest. And so when I kind of learned, the ins and outs of that, coupled with all of this traffic, it was just a no-brainer decision to take the helm. And then the handshake agreement was to grow it and sell it. That was sort of the agreement. We brought on another guy as CEO. So I was CMO and COO. Because we were going to sell it, we decided not to raise money. It was like the golden era of fundraising too. I mean, there's never an easier period to raise insane quantities of cash as 2015, 16, 17. But because we were going to sell it, we're like, you know what? Let's control our own destiny. Let's focus on getting to profitability, and then the score will take care of itself kind of thing. And so, yeah, it was 2 years of grinding, keep super lean. Well, I'm sure we'll dive into like full funnel optimization, all that kind of stuff. By 2017, we got to profitability. And by 2018, the inbound started coming in. And as we're going through the process, I didn't want to sell to a strategic and just have AllTrails kind of disband. And, as is usually the case. So we partnered with a growth equity fund in San Francisco called Spectrum Equity. And soon thereafter, they made me CEO, and I've been in that role ever since.
And I think that's a great segue into the key inflection point we wanted to talk about today. So to briefly recap, you joined AllTrails in 2015. At that point, I think you've said on other interviews, you had around 1 million registered users, 20,000 or so active subscribers, but the company's still small. You've got 6 people, great core product, strong product market fit, product channel fit, but you come in as COO and CMO, and you're trying to figure out how to really drive an inflection point for this business. So let's start with, who were the early adopters of AllTrails? When you joined in 2015, who were those 20,000 active subscribers who were using AllTrails on a regular basis?
So the original sort of brand focus was really for the hardcore outdoor enthusiasts. It's the thru hikers, the search and rescue folks, the lone wolf in the backcountry type of archetype.
Yep.
And having spent 9 years in the ski industry, I certainly spent my time catering to the core and recognizing the strengths. There are opportunities that come with that, and there's also a lot of challenges that come with that.
Yep.
But with AllTrails, just even before I took the role, I just knew. It was just like, if I'm going to do this, here's what we're going to do, which is that we had to get outside of the core. It was a crowded space. It's not like we were the only ones doing it either. And when I looked around, everyone's kind of trying to do the same thing. It was like really complicated backcountry mapping tools and, lingo and topo lines and just all the flair. And I said, if we're going to turn this into something big, if we really want to seize this opportunity, I think we need to do a hard pivot. And I think what we need to do is focus on this massive, I think it's an unbounded TAM. Like, I really do. I think the outdoors really can be for everyone. And it's really like, how do we tear down the barriers to entry? Right? Like, I grew up in the backcountry. I grew up backpacking. I don't think twice about sleeping in a tent in the middle of nowhere or hiking a trail I've never set foot on before. It's very natural to me. Yep. But I'm an exception. I think you are too, right? That's not most people, And so I really thought we have this opportunity, use this technology, use this platform, use this audience that we've amassed. And again, leverage technology to instill confidence and give people information, just get more and more people connected to nature. And a lot of good downstream things can happen from that if people start giving a shit about nature, rather than thinking it's this dark, scary thing that just needs to be, bulldozed over or whatever. So yeah, that was the big inflection point, I think, right out of the gate. Was like, we're going to make this mainstream.
So before we jump into all the advantages of this pivot you all made to more casual mainstream hikers, let's talk a little bit more about some of the advantages you had with that early adopter base. You said there were some other competitors out there who were doing or trying to do what AllTrails was doing. What were some of the advantages of having a narrowly defined early adopter segment that sort of laid the foundation for this next chapter that you helped lead?
That's a very good question. One is focus. Focus is honestly one of our biggest challenges. There are no shortage of ideas that we want and at some point we'll build. But when you have a very specific niche, it helps suss out what's going to bubble up to the top, right? And you're in active conversation with them. It feels more personal. It is a more one-to-one relationship because it's a small niche group. There's more quick iterative feedback because people are emailing me directly all the time.
Well, it's this tight community. They're probably talking to each other too.
And so there's a word of mouth coefficient, right? Yep. There's definitely that helps. So yeah, there's definitely, in terms of going to 0 to 1, I think that there's a lot of benefit to keeping the group tight and focusing on a specific slice of product development and then seeing where to iterate from there. A specific example that comes to mind, so going to 0 to 1 is hard. And in truth, I don't like going to 0 to 1. I'm not a 0 to 1 guy. It's not my happy place. I like scale.
I'm similar. I heard you talk about that on another podcast. And, there are 0 to 1 people and there are growth people. And I think you and I relate on the growth stuff.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And so, when the 0 to 1 people are the scrappiest people you'll ever meet in your life, right? They're just always looking for all right, it's almost like a hustler. There's always stuff in flight. There's always some kind of scheme going on. And one of the things that we did to jumpstart UGC was kind of basically like a leaderboard.
Yep.
right? And so we had this thing called a reputation score, terrible name, but a reputation score. And you would
Hmm.
get points anytime you added a trail to our system, you made
Hmm.
edits, you added a review, you added photos. And again, it's a very symbiotic relationship. We're talking directly with these people. And on paper, it sounds really clever. And it did lead to a big uptick in UGC. But at a certain point, it was decided that if you reach a certain threshold of reputation score, we'll automatically approve every edit that you make on the platform. So no need for human intervention, just like let it rip. You're one of us. And what we found was that people were then competing hard
Mm.
for that leaderboard. And
The
what was
unintended consequences of extrinsic motivation.
exactly right, exactly misaligned incentives, what could go wrong? And so we would have people out there with like, I don't know if it's GoPro, but basically like a video camera taking a snapshot every 10 seconds
Yep.
and then uploading 600, 800 photos of a trail as if it's like a flip book, but if you're going through a photo gallery and you have to tap to get to the next photo, it was a disaster, right?
It's
We had
too much.
trails live on our platform that were like Disneyland, or walking from Planet Hollywood to the Circle K in Las Vegas was an actual live trail. So anyways, it was one of those things where, okay, you know what we need to do? We need to rethink this. And
Yep.
I shine a light on these misadventures because I think through them, it really helped. It helped us figure out, because again, at 6 people, it's not 0 to 1, but it's 1.2, 1.5, whatever, right? Like it's still such early days that, all right, let's do the step back. What's working, what's not working, and what do we need to prioritize if we want to become, I talk about all the time, like it's really easy as a founder, as an executive to see Z. What does Z look like, right? But it's
Right.
really like, how do you get from A to B, B to C, C to
Yep.
D, right? And that's where I think that's what makes or breaks companies. And so thinking through that, okay, like if we want to be this platform for the masses that tears down the barriers, that's trusted and beloved and everything else, we really need to focus on the quality of our data. We can't just have it be this like free for all. You make a recording, it's live on the platform. We're one of the only platforms out there that curates
Yep.
every trail, right? Like we have a team of humans, and we're not. Yeah, we'll talk about AI, I'm sure, at some point. Like this is human curation. We have people on payroll, full-time employees in the United States that vet every single trail and the minimum amount of metadata and content that needs to be there. And so when I started, we had 50,000 trails. We actually pulled it back down to about 4,000 trails that we felt were vetted.
Oh,
And we
wow.
just had to rebuild the stock from 4,000. We're up to 475,000 today
Yep.
of like, human API powered, just like raw muscle curation.
That's so smart. And that takes a lot of courage as an executive to say, hey, we're going to reconsolidate around our core. But I remember we talked about this. So I led product growth at Quizlet for almost 4 years. Very similar business model, right? You're pairing a free organic user acquisition engine through SEO and word of mouth with all of the amazing aspects of a recurring consumer subscription business model. But related to what you just said around trails, there was a relatively small percentage of Quizlet's flashcard sets that drove an outsized percentage of our traffic and our user and subscriber engagement. And so, okay, so you're moving beyond these early adopters. You reconsolidate around a smaller set of trails, make sure that the quality bar is really, really high. But then the core of this inflection point you're talking about is this shift towards more casual mainstream hikers. And I imagine there were a number of things that needed to change about the product, the branding, the messaging, the pricing, the business model in order for that to work. So why don't we go through a few of those? Let's start with core product and brand. What were some of the first changes that AllTrails made to position itself to be a better fit for that casual hiker?
Yeah, it's a really great insight. It's not as easy as just like flipping a switch. It touches everything. It touches everything. So I think, product development takes longer, obviously, especially when you're a team of 6, when you have one iOS developer, one Android developer, 2 web developers. So in the short term, the quickest things we could do was focusing on imagery and copy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like I said earlier, there's kind of this like lone wolf archetype that's used, and thankfully less so today, but in the early 2010s, that decade really, it's like that Alex Honnold,
Mm-hmm.
guy hanging off of a ledge somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and that is like really sexy in a photo, but it's incredibly off-putting for a
Yeah.
lot of people, right? That's not the association that we want to have with the outdoors. It's really, we want to show everyday people. One is making sure it's safe and it's
Mhm.
approachable. And you see people of different colors and different ages and different sizes and families. And again, representation matters. Representation absolutely matters. I've had this conversation with CMOs of some of the big brands out there. If all you see are just fit, lean, 28-year-old white guys, it's going to be
Yep.
really, really hard to grow to the masses. People are just going to say,
Right.
that's cool, but that's not for me. Right. And so like that was immediate. It's like, we got to change the representation from an imagery perspective. And then from a copy perspective, there's a lot of lingo in the space. Same thing with skiing. Right.
Yep.
And we did that at Liftopia too. It's like, gosh, we got to get more new entrants in here so we can't make anyone feel unwelcome because they don't understand the words on the page.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it can be
Um,
intimidating.
absolutely, absolutely. And so really being mindful, and this is where like my growth background through the marketing side was really like driving a lot of this just because what I knew, right? And so, and it's easy to implement quickly. You know, you can do that in a day. Really go through, audit all the copy, audit your onboarding. Actually, I mean, we had to produce onboarding emails. I was just in MailChimp, you know, just
Mhm.
doing it all myself, but really being mindful of the type of wording we're using, the imagery that we're using. Then from a product perspective, simplification,
Yep.
right? I think that when you're catering to the core, there's like a race for all of the bells and whistles.
Yeah,
And what ends up happening inevitably is like you need an instruction manual.
totally.
And this is where like we really tried to emulate, and to this day we still try and emulate the simplicity of something like Apple, right? Where it's intuitive. You can pick it up. This makes sense. You know how to use it. Easier said than done. You know, it took years for us to get there. But that's always been one of the guiding principles from a product development perspective is simplicity and making it intuitive. And there's times where you're making conscious trade-offs between, you know, that like all the way, you know, full
Power
features.
user.
Yep, exactly. And again, because there's room to meet the needs of the core. But again, from a first principle perspective, we're going for, again, tearing down the barriers, getting more people into our tent. And so that's been guiding a lot of the product development as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point. And for consumer subscription apps in particular, there's this trade-off between power, feature richness to support your power users who are in the app every single day and they're willing to pay a lot of money for all of these long tail features. But the more you do that, the more you lose both your casual user who can then no longer navigate the complexity of the app experience or new users, right? Even new potential power users who don't yet understand how your product works, it can just be too much to navigate. And it makes sense that as you move from this higher intent early adopter group towards this more casual mainstream hiker, you needed to simplify the experience. What was your subscription price when you joined? And then what was the process that you went through to iterate to the right subscription price for this new audience?
When I joined, our annual subscription was $50 a year. And knowing that this wasn't 0 to 1, knowing that there was momentum behind this platform, I didn't want to come in and just flip the table overnight either. So I actually spent the first couple months just like really trying to soak up as much quantitative and qualitative data as I could figure. What do we have? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? All of that. A lot of my time those first few weeks was spent just reading every App Store review and
Mm-hmm.
Play Store review we ever got, every blog post, Reddit threads, just all of it. And one of the common themes that kept coming up was that it was too expensive. Again, for the core, it's fine, but for everyday users, maybe, you know, people who only hike a few days a year,
Mm-hmm.
it just felt like it wasn't a good value.
Yep.
And so we started price testing, and it was primarily on what price testing's hard. I'm sure we'll talk about this. Price testing's really, really hard. So we started on web and we tested. So we were at 50 and we tested against $30 a year. And then we tested against $15 a year too, just see from a revenue maximization perspective, what happens. What we found was that basically 15 and 30 behaved pretty similarly,
Yep.
but 15 was so cheap, margins were just so lean that we had no room for maneuverability. We could never discount it. We could never do any offers or anything. So we went with 30, and that got us actually like pretty well for such a quick and dirty test. It actually was like very helpful for us. And we stayed there for years. And only a couple of years ago, as costs everywhere were rising and just like everything was just, oh my gosh, like our OpEx was just, it was tough out there for a while, right? I think any operator who's listening right now will say the same thing. And we felt like, we had added so much new functionality. So we did a minor price bump from 30 to 36. We did a lot of testing. We partnered with some McKinsey people. There's all these consulting firms out there, and they were great. I don't want to take anything away from it, but basically like validated what I think we all suspected, which was $36. That's the right price point. So yeah.
A couple of things you said there. I love the anecdote of we tested 30 versus 15. From a pure average revenue per user standpoint, it was a wash. But then you move beyond the science to the art of what the right price should look like. And it makes a lot of sense that $30 gives you a lot more room to maneuver. And I know that seasonal discounts and promotions have continued to be an important part of AllTrails' growth strategy. And so I think that's an important lesson there, which is don't just look at what the math tells you. If it's close, apply a strategic lens to it. The second question I wanted to ask relates to, and I get this question a lot, like when do you just go run a pricing A/B test in the product versus when does it actually make sense to step back and do a more comprehensive pricing study, like a conjoint analysis or a Van Westendorp analysis? It sounds like when you first joined, it was fairly obvious $50 per year was too high. So you ran this quick and dirty A/B test, and you very quickly arrived at $30 per year as the new subscription price. But then a few years go by, you've added a lot more value to the product, and so it's worth investing the extra time and energy into a more comprehensive study.
I think we were more mature as an org.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is just a truism of growing and scaling a company. The bigger you get, kind of the more you have to lose if you get something wrong.
Yep.
And that includes reputational damage and things like that, right? And so I get why companies become more risk averse as they get bigger. And this is a challenge that we have all the time, is how do we keep that startup mentality? And so to your point earlier, I do still in my bones, in my gut, I believe in intuition. I believe in trusting your gut. Anytime I've tried to rationalize something over what my gut tells me, chances are it's wrong, right? And so I think that again, statistical significance is amazing when you can get it, but very rarely if a company is focusing on momentum, we focus on momentum. Like that is our rallying cry around how we operate. It's all about momentum, right? We're just going to charge up that hill and we're going to do it. We might not be like faster than everyone all the time because we have a longer horizon line, but we are going to just outpace everyone out there, and we're going to be relentless, right? Like it's just this nonstop focus on momentum. But there are times where you do need to be more cautious. At that point, we decide, like we have this opportunity. Let's do the more thorough research. So since that point, we've actually stood up a bigger internal research department, which I'm very grateful for. It's like an awesome new muscle. And so it's not as disruptive. We can actually have our research team be 12 to 18 months sometimes in front of where the roadmap is. And so we can do a lot of this in-house now. So there's some things coming down the road that, or as we think about international expansion, that's actually another great area where it's really hard to do pricing right. And you can base it off of like GDP or propensity to spend or whatever, but you're still just making guesses. And so our internal research department has helped us get a whole lot crisper on what does it make. Because now we're doing pricing on a market by market basis, right? We're doing pricing in like
much
30,
more complicated.
40. It's so complicated. So bringing that in-house was really, really helpful. We can't do a 6-figure analysis on each market. And, that's just not going to scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to recap, you make this pivot towards a more casual hiker. You can do a quick and dirty A/B test in the product to figure out, okay, we need to drop our $50 per year subscription price. But as you got larger, as you expanded internationally and needed to think about local willingness to pay across multiple countries, or as you started to think about capturing more consumer surplus for users with lower willingness to pay and running discounts, there are some of these more complex second order questions where I think tools like Conjoint or Van Westendorp can be really powerful.
Absolutely. But even then though, I will say there's a scenario where we could maximize for revenue. Mm-hmm. And there's a scenario where we can maximize for subscribers. And these are two very different business questions, right? And it actually it's a different question for each market that we operate in as well. And so again, it comes back, you can have all the best data in the world, but it still comes down to a gut decision, not just a blind gut decision. It's obviously informed. We're talking about with our board, we're talking about with our internal stakeholders, but there's not a clear path forward all the time. And we have to kind of do, again, like trust your intuition, trust your gut.
Yeah, so let's start to talk about both the importance of your freemium business model and the importance of free users on your platform. And then we can talk a little bit more about international expansion. So you've talked on other forums about the importance of SEO and particularly hyperlocal SEO for AllTrails' growth. I can imagine that became even more important as you moved into this world of the casual mainstream hiker, because it's not like they're waking up every morning and saying, let me open up AllTrails to, help me with my outdoor adventure today. They're sort of bumping into AllTrails oftentimes through a Google search. And so what was the moment when you all as a business realized how critical hyperlocal search was going to be?
Before I even took the role back in 2015, it was so obvious that SEO, I mean, the product market fit was clear with the subscription business, even if it was overpriced at the time. And then from a product channel fit perspective, it was so obviously SEO. And for us, because our price point is so low, these organic channels are all the more important.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, it's always been just like interwoven into the fabric of our DNA. And SEO is great. SEO begets PR, SEO begets word of mouth coefficient, so I kind of like do sort of lump like just these organic growth channels sort of together into one. And I think that's why we've been able to get as far as we have today. It's because in some ways we were fortunate. AllTrails started in 2010, right? Even in 2015, when I took over, we were probably 30% mobile usage, 70% desktop. Right. And within a couple of years, it inverted, but it was so early still on this like mobile adoption curve that SEO was just such a huge driver of traffic, of awareness, of re-engagement. So even folks would install the app and you kind of forget about the big black hole of, your phone. And then you do a Google search and we would redirect you back into the app. You're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So SEO has always been one of, I think, our biggest strategic advantages. And obviously, the landscape of SEO is changing today pretty dramatically. And we have been investing heavily over the last several years about other like scalable, ownable channels. It's really hard out there right now, capturing consumer interest and attention. And the landscape across every dimension, top of funnel, seems like it's just changing, every few months. Even compared back to like 2-3 years ago, it's so different than where it was. And so SEO is still a key toolkit, but it's not the only one.
Yeah. Well, and I think you mentioned a subtle point there that's important, which is when you joined, 70% of AllTrails' traffic was coming in through desktop web, 30% mobile web. Then it flips to 70-30 mobile web. And that makes it much easier to convert a search query on mobile web directly into an app store visit and an app download. So that was a wave that you all rode. More recently, you've started to expand internationally. So let's talk about international expansion. And I guess I'd love to start with, we went through this challenge at Quizlet, right? You're trying to unlock these nascent international markets where you don't have the word of mouth flywheel already going. You don't have the critical mass of content in order to be able to drive SEO. So what were some of the first steps you needed to take in order to get your foot in the door in other countries?
Yeah, international expansion is hard. I guess one advantage we have, similar to Quizlet versus a more traditional marketplace, is our supply side, our trail content doesn't have any expectations, right? If you're trying to amass drivers, if you're trying to amass,
Teachers.
teachers, sure. Yeah. Bedrooms, like anything where it's like, okay, but now I'm here supply side, where's the demand, right? And then they drift off. For us, we could stand up trail pages and let them just sit and percolate, right? Like, doesn't cost us anything. There's no urgency. It can sit. Our first step towards international expansion was really from a trail coverage perspective. And with most of our users in North America, one of the guiding principles was, well, where are they going? And let's make sure we have coverage there. And so there's a dichotomy within AllTrails as we think about our trail content. There's sort of this like bar for local searching for local content is much, much higher, right? Yep. If you think about it, like you live in Colorado, so you've got your, obviously there's like Rocky Mountain National Park, but also all the local parks and all the like little, cool mountain biking trails. And it's like, if you don't know us and you open the app and you don't see that trail in your neighborhood that you love, you're like, what is this? Like how much, so local searching for local content is a very high bar. But then there's tourists searching for tourist content. And that's kind of like the classic, like 80-20, like, all right, we just need to focus on, 20% of the trails in this country that
Yeah.
are going to
And
cover
it just needs to
80%.
be good enough, right? Because
It
the
just
bar
needs
is
to be
much
good
lower.
enough. So AllTrails, again, from a trail content perspective, sort of has two parts. One is the data integrity stuff I was alluding to earlier. We create these trail pages. This is kind of like the atomic level of AllTrails, right? You have a trail page, it has a start point, it has an end point, it has a line on the map, it has elevation gain, it has difficulty level, and it has all this metadata around what activities can you do on the trail? Ability, is it dog friendly? Is it kid friendly? Is it wheelchair accessible? And what are you going to see out there? Are there waterfalls? Are there lakes? Are there wildflowers, et cetera? So we can stand all of that up, and that's great, and that's helpful. But where AllTrails really shines, where I think it's just best in class, best in the world, is when you take that and then you layer on the UGC, the user generated content, and then you have all of the recent photos and reviews and ratings and just like that real time, like, you can open the app and you see reviews from this morning on there, right? It's very powerful when you see that in the wild. And so I say all this because basically international expansion started with these curated guides that we did. And then through North American tourists traveling abroad, it slowly starts filling in the UGC, which then feeds the SEO flywheel, which then, so
You
it's
see it
very
start to take
cyclical.
off.
Exactly. And then at a certain point, sometimes markets just take off by themselves, which is fascinating. Like, for example, this year, Poland just popped. And I didn't see it coming. I don't, and this is part of our internal strategic finance. Like, what are the markers that maybe are indicative of a market being about to pop that we can accelerate it even faster? We have some sharpening up to do there, but there's other markets where it's like, all right, we feel like we have a minimum density of content. Let's start opening up the funnel with paid acquisition and PR and things like that, right? So we take it on a country by country basis. We can't do it regionally. It's too broad. And France is very different than Germany, which is very different than the UK.
Yep.
So anyway, so that's all with regards to content. I'd say the next big step was translations. And so in 2019, so we've been doing trail content expansion since 2015, right? 2019, we translated the platform into French, German, and Spanish. And that was shockingly hard. We started 2019 with 15 people, so we were still pretty small. We finished the year with about 30 people, but that took a tremendous amount of bandwidth and capacity, and we learned a lot. And it's a multi-year process. And then you realize the difference between translation and localization and how far apart they are. Again, if you're trying to clear that bar of local searching for local content, it can't be seen as being translated by a machine. It needs to have that human component, and that impacts your staffing and, all of your processes. There's a cardinality that gets introduced to QA, to customer support, to marketing, right? Like, you're not just doing it for one language, you're doing it now times 4. So figuring out how to operationalize all that. So it took us a few years to like really kind of get that dialed in. And then in 2022 or 2023, we layered in, I think, 12 more languages. And so, we've got some really great coverage across obviously like North and South America and Europe. And then I think the next big question in front of us, but these were all Romance languages. So they're all relatively similar. And if you can do German with its long characters, like, you can kind of do anything in the Romance language world.
Right.
But the next wave
German is always the long pole in the tent from a UI standpoint.
Totally, which is great because again, like, it will break all of your buttons, it will break all of your headers, right? And so if you can figure that out, you're good if you want to do Dutch or Swedish or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the next wave for us is going to be like, what's our Japan strategy? What's our Korea strategy? What do we think about right to left languages? And
which is a whole different ball game.
Whole different ballgame.
But you said a few things there just to recap around international expansion that I think are so important. One, international expansion is hard. I think this gets underappreciated by a lot of people. And I think part of the reason it's hard is it's not a monolithic thing. It's really multiple challenges, right? You have to localize the core product experience. You have to seed an initial critical mass of locally relevant content, which often requires doing things that don't scale, to quote the famous Paul Graham quote. Then you have to eventually start to get your core flywheels going, so word of mouth and SEO, but that can only happen once you have a critical mass of early adopters that have seeded the market. And then at some point, you often end up having to create more bespoke features that are locally relevant. That's not always the case, but that's usually the last step because it's the highest effort. It's often the lowest ROI, but there are cases where, to go back to the Quizlet example, in Europe, you have multiple countries where you pick a track and then all of the classes you take and all of the students you study with and the teachers you learn from are tied to that track. Well, that's not something built into the core product experience in the US. And so you have to start to think about these core product changes in some cases that fundamentally need to be made in order to unlock additional international markets. So it's a big challenge, but it sounds like it's one that AllTrails has made a lot of progress on. You mentioned AI earlier. Let's talk briefly about AI. How is the game changing for AllTrails, both in terms of your growth strategy and core product experience now that AI has really hit the mainstream?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, even compared to 9 months ago, it feels like it's settled down a little bit. I think that, in my opinion, a lot of AI is a solution looking for a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made the strategic decision not to rush head first, especially from the consumer facing side of things. We just didn't really see a killer use case out there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so where we have been focusing on is on the back office side of things, on developer productivity. So, GitHub Copilot and Gemini and Grammarly and,
Mm-hmm.
all of the, again, like the B2B, just help us be more efficient. And I wouldn't say anything's necessarily been like a step function change per se, but there have definitely been productivity increases and it's encouraging. I think we can, again, if you care
And
about momentum,
those productivity gains really compound over time.
they do. They absolutely do. So I've been very encouraged by that. Very happy to see, again, just anything that feeds momentum, I'll smile upon. And then on the consumer side, there are some trails that have 10,000 reviews on them. And you, as an end user, it starts getting hard to kind of parse through them all. And so we started doing kind of like a GPT review summary at the top of every page. That's
Mm-hmm.
been great. As a user, I love it. I
Yeah.
use it all the time.
Yeah, me too.
It's not everything like revolutionary, right? I mean, Amazon's been doing it forever, but it's a great, relevant, simple use case that makes our core product experience better, right? So 2, 3 years from now, is there going to be like a bespoke bot that, is customized for you and, is going to proactively, maybe, right? But I think we're still very cautious when it comes to throwing out AI capabilities up front. And especially, we're sending people into the backcountry. We're sending people, we need to get it right. And so same thing with like the data integrity piece. We're not using AI to create new trails. We cannot afford the hallucinations.
I think you really nailed it when you said on the core product side, AI can, at its worst, be a solution in search of a problem. And so being really selective around where does it actually make sense to apply AI to solve a genuine customer problem. On the growth side of things, I've had a number of companies ask me what the future of SEO is going to look like in a world where ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity are taking up more and more and more search volume. What, if anything, is AllTrails doing in order to position itself to appear in those answer engine results?
Yeah. And this is where I think it just goes to the changing landscape of SEO and what SEO 6 months, 12 months from now is going to look like. It's obviously so much more than just a Google search result. So about a year ago to the date, almost, we were a launch partner with OpenAI and right. And so we worked with them when they launched their GPT store or whatever they call it. And that was fascinating. And we learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm being honest, it's not like it's supplanted Google yet. The whole thing is a little bit messy right now. And I think there's a lot of worry from publishers outside of AllTrails that, again, our content's just getting scraped and it's being, layered in without attribution. And I think that there are conversations being had and conversations that are continuing to be had to make sure, again, talk about unintended consequences of this, right? We spend millions of dollars a year producing trail content and, it's a core part of our business. Attribution is very important. You had mentioned a little bit earlier about our free users, right? I mean, over 90% of our user base is free. And we love that. Again, our mission is to get people outside. Like that's the whole point of AllTrails is to get people all around the globe outside.
Yeah.
And so we have no qualms whatsoever producing content and giving it away to people on our platform
Hmm.
for free. I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch how this evolves. I think that the conversations that we've had with the different AI companies, and to be clear, it's not all of them yet, but the conversations we've had are encouraging, that they understand the concerns and are starting to work with publishers to ensure that this continues to be a viable ecosystem.
Hmm.
Um, but it's fascinating to see what's going on and, again, what the future holds in this space. And this is
Yeah.
why I mean, I will say to all of your listeners, the single best thing you can do is create your own reachable audience, you know, create get as many people into your app and that you can reach either via email or push notifications or in-app messages or whatever. Like if I don't know, so much of it kind of reminds me of like when people were building companies off of Facebook and then Facebook changed their algorithm and suddenly, the entire business went bust because they couldn't reach these audiences that they had spent such a fortune amassing on a third-party platform that they
Right.
had no control over.
Yeah, you've got to own the audience.
You got to own the audience.
That's so important for consumer subscription models in particular because churn is much higher than B2B. Unlike even some other consumer models like social networks, for example, you don't have the super strong network effect that's going to keep everybody on your platform no matter what. And so really building loyalty and building touch points to sustain engagement and retention is critical. So let's start to wrap this up. You joined AllTrails in 2015. At that point, you guys were at around 20,000 active subscribers. I know you mentioned on another podcast that by 2021, you'd reached 25 million registered users, a million active subscribers. You won App of the Year in 2023. Congratulations. That must have been a huge milestone for everyone at the company. Looking forward, what has you most excited as the CEO of AllTrails? Where do you go from here?
I've been here just over 9 years, and I honestly, I feel like we're just getting started. Like, so also the whole thing is product-driven growth. Like that's the
Hmm.
highest leverage path towards growth that I think fits for our business. There's no shortage of things that we want to build, that we will build. And so much of our trajectory over the last couple of years has been um, on the operation side, like really scaling the company for maximum momentum.
Hmm.
Right. And so we're at about 220 people today. Maybe we'll be at 240 by the end of the year or something like that. But I feel like we're really at that sweet spot
Yep.
where more people just means more bureaucracy. Right. And so I think we are at like almost peak momentum right now. And I love that because that means we can build so much more in parallel faster, and we can balance short-term bets with medium-term bets with long-term bets.
Yep.
So I look at our roadmap for 2020. We won App of the Year in 2023, and we spent 2024 rebuilding the product end to end.
Hmm.
We rebuilt our homepage. We rebuilt our trail pages. We added park pages into the apps. We rebuilt the save and review flow. We rebuilt our app, our watch app.
And it looks beautiful, by the way. Shout out to Ivan and his team. They've done an incredible job.
Oh, I say this all the time. I think we have the best team in all of tech. I think we have absolutely the best team in all of tech, and everyone is laser focused on our mission and just getting people outside and tearing down the barriers. And it's so inspiring watching what they can do with this amount of momentum velocity around them. So it's the roadmap. I am so excited for what we're going to be building over the next several years.
Do you think you'll ever expand beyond hiking into other outdoor activities, beyond what you've already done, similar to sort of Strava going from cyclists to running to other activities, or are you all in on hiking for the long run?
Well, I think I would say that we're all in on trails.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got hiking, we've got trail running, we've got mountain biking. We can do mountain biking better, and we will do that. More fun things to come there. We do backpacking. Again, we've got some really great new features coming that are going to help expand that use case too. So we are all in on trails, 100%. Down the road,
Who knows?
anything's possible.
Bright future. Well, great. Let's wrap up with a lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a series of quick questions. You can give me 1 or 2 sentence responses, but just a fun way to wrap up every episode. What's the most amazing outdoor experience you've ever had? And why was it so great?
Oh, that's a great question. Picking just one. I'm going to go recency bias on this one. Last October, I took my boys. I have 3 kids. My wife and daughter were in Southern California for a lacrosse tournament. So I took my boys to Yosemite, and we stayed in an unheated A-frame cabin in late October. It was freezing.
Oh, it sounds
great.
great.
Hiked to the top of Vernal Falls. I think he was 7 at the time. My little guy just like charging up those steps. And it was just this beautiful, magical shared experience, core memories for all of us.
I love that. The Minnesotan in me loves cold weather. And so made me so happy when you talked about the freezing in the A-frame. What's the best thing about working at AllTrails? And what's one thing you would change?
Okay, best thing aside from this amazingly inspirational team and the mission, I love so first Friday of every month is trail day. We close
Mm,
the office down and everyone just goes outside,
what a
goes
perk.
hiking, goes running, goes biking, goes skiing in the winter, whatever. Just like clear your mind, get some unstructured time, we're remote first, so connect with other folks in your area that you don't get to work with day to day. I love that.
That may be my single favorite corporate perk I've ever
Well,
heard of. And I
and
live in Colorado. My wife and I are both outdoor nuts, but
it's a
what
freebie
a
for
great.
anyone, everyone. Take it, take it.
Yeah.
We
Well, and it's
try to
great
do
for the
it
business
over.
too. I mean, because there's all sorts of research that says you get outside, you're going to be more creative, you're going to be more productive. So it makes so much sense.
100%. Yeah.
Besides All Trails, what's your favorite consumer subscription app and why?
This is gonna be basic. I apologize in advance for the basic answer. It's Spotify. Like I said, I have 3 kids. I have a teenage daughter. We have very different tastes in music. So the family plan, we're locked in forever. We will never get off of this
Totally.
Spotify family plan.
I wouldn't even call that a basic answer, but I'm sure it will be a very popular answer as I ask this question to other guests on my podcast. It's just such a great product, and I use Spotify every day. In your experience, what's the hardest thing about growing consumer subscription apps? I know you're on record as saying subscription businesses are magical, but there are some real challenges, especially for B2C subscriptions.
Yeah.
So what have you found challenging?
I guess 2 things. One, the fragmentation of consumer attention.
Hmm.
It just top of funnel is so hard these days. It really is hard. I feel very fortunate that we have the momentum that we have, that we're in the size that we have, where we can kind of create our own gravity a little bit. If we were going to 0 to 1 today, I don't see how you do it other than buying your way into growth. It's really, really tricky. And then I'd say the other thing, being here 9 years now, sustaining 40, 50% plus year on year growth, year in, year out. Law of large numbers is real, but again, this is why I think that product driven growth is such a high leverage growth strategy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I feel like the trap so many consumer apps of any kind fall into is overspending on paid ads. And sometimes you don't have a choice, but it can really lead to, I call it the cross of death. LTVs go down, CACs go up as you move past your early adopters and can just put you in a very dangerous place. So when you can grow organically, it's really nice. Okay, last question. How do you think the consumer subscription app ecosystem will change in the next 1 to 2 years? And how does AllTrails fit into that?
Good question. Tough question. I guess 2 things. One, I think that the trend of consolidation is going to continue.
Hmm.
It feels, again, with top of funnel getting harder and getting to breakout growth also getting harder. I think that you're just going to see more mergers and acquisitions and the big getting bigger. I think going 0 to 1 is going to be easier than ever because of AI.
Hmm.
But I think, again, this whole product channel fit thing is going to be the real insurmountable issue. So I think that I think that. And then the other piece I think is we are going to see more AI factoring into the subscription piece. Um, and again, what that looks like, I don't know. It's anyone's guess, but my hunch is, personalization with kind of like this direct, like, chat based interface. It just seems inevitable.
Yeah, I do think you'll see more of that. And I love what you said around consolidation, although I would take it a step further and say I think there's going to be this dichotomy where because AI is increasing the degree to which the cost of building a new mobile app is coming down, you're going to have lots of new entrants, especially in categories that naturally lend themselves to the new technologies AI supports. But they won't necessarily raise venture funding and they won't necessarily get past 1, 5, 10 million in ARR. And then on the other end of the spectrum, because the first mover advantage around mobile has largely gone away at this point, you're going to have consolidation in most of the really large categories, health and fitness, productivity, education. And so, the strong will get stronger and everyone else will sort of be absorbed into the category kings. Well, great. This has been such a pleasure, Ron, as I knew it would be. Thanks for coming onto the podcast. It's been great having you. Any parting words you want to share before we wrap up?
Anyway, well, again, like I said, I'm a big Phil Carter fan. I was stoked when I heard you were launching a podcast. I've been reading all of the content you've been publishing. So I hope this takes off. For anyone listening who's feeling stressed or anxious about 2025 and what the future holds, there is nothing better that I know of than a long walk in nature. Like there's just nothing better for the soul, your mind. So yeah, let's all resolve to spend a little bit more time out on the trail in 2025.
Well said. Well, thanks for the kind words. Thanks for being one of my first guests. And let's all get outside more in 2025. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Phil.